Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. This is Doc T, another episode of the Horse Advocate podcast. I'm really grateful that you're here. I like to talk about a lot of things, all about horses and trying to help us identify where we might be going wrong or where we might be going right with horses. And oftentimes I get magazines sent to me that tell me certain things about what's happening in our industry. And I like to look at them and give you my take on it. I have two things that I want to show you. The first is the economic impact of the Louisiana State University School of Veterinary Medicine on the Louisiana economy. This is sent to me because I'm licensed there. And I just want to turn to the last page. I mean, it's filled with graphs and pictures and stuff and using their college colors. But I just want to read the summary and conclusion. Here we go. Summary and conclusion. LSU Vet Med is home to an impressive 472 students. 472 students are in the graduating class of 2023. When I graduated from Cornell in 1984, there were 80 of us. 80. Yeah, there are 80. I mean, it was quite a select group of people who went out there and worked their tails off and earned money and paid their debts. Now we have 472 trying to take care of the population of animals out there, and they're all competing with each other. And the debt ratio the debt to income ratio of what these veterinarians have on their first day on the job is so high that it's almost becoming limiting for most people to become a veterinarian. Their debt that they carry with them is so great. And I find that, as I've written many times in podcasts and did podcasts before, I talked about most men realize that they can make more money without spending much money driving an 18-wheeler up and down the road. And listen, this is not condescending. I used to be a truck driver. I love driving up and down the road. I love taking those rigs, all 18 wheels, all the axles, all the gears. And if I could, I'd buy a brand new Tesla semi and drive that, because it is so much fun for me to drive. Don't know why. It just is. It resonates. So you're probably listening to this and saying the last thing I want to do is drive. You might be driving right now, desperately to listening to me, trying to pass the time because you hate it. But the cost of becoming a truck driver is nothing compared to the cost of getting 4 years of undergraduate and 4 years of veterinary school under your belt. And we've jumped from 80 or 100 students up to, in this case, 472 at this university. And now we have 2 vet schools in New York, 2 in Tennessee. I think they've added one in Arizona. I'm not sure where the other new ones are. So we're getting more and more new schools. And what really blows my mind is that it says by 2028, which is 5 years from now, it is expected that there will be 840 students. So they've almost doubled the number of students that are going through their classroom. I don't know what kind of infrastructure they're doing to increase the capacity in both professors to have a good ratio of student to teacher ratio. I don't know what they're doing, but they're just looking at how much this is going to bring an estimated economic impact to their state. It's jumping from 1,469 jobs and $74.1 million in earnings and an additional $163 million in economic output attributed to the school is going to increase to economic impact of $279.3 million. I also noticed that they don't say how many jobs or earnings that's going to have. They just kind of skip over that part. These graduates fill a need in their community by both treating animals and creating jobs as they hire people to work in their office. what they're basically saying is, in this day and age of veterinary medicine, as well as all workforces, the thrust is not in creating competent and enthusiastic and passionate workers, no matter what it is, whether it's veterinary medicine or not. This, again, my opinion, but this is how I see it. It is to build on this concept of quality of life. So now we're going to have more veterinarians in a community serving virtually the same amount of pets, maybe a small increase. I don't know. It's getting so expensive to treat the to treat animals. A lot of people are saying, no, I don't want a pet. So I don't know what the statistics are there. I don't think that it's growing as rapidly as the number of veterinarians out there. So I think what's happening is veterinarians are now going to have a better quality of life, meaning that they won't work as hard, they'll have more time off, weekends, etc. But what's going to happen to the price and the cost of veterinary medicine? Isn't it going to go up? Because if there's 100 dogs and they're being served by 10 veterinarians, that the cost is being distributed over those 10 veterinarians, so they have a return on their investment in both time and money that they've invested in their careers. But if that jumps to 20 veterinarians for the same 100 animals, somebody's either going to be out of a job or they're going to cut their income in half. And that's just not going to do well. So veterinarians are going to have to increase their prices. And this concerns me, because more and more people are going to say, I can't afford a vet, and they're going to go outside the realm of veterinary medicine to get their care, even coming to Dr. Google and asking, what should I do? And with people like me becoming more and more popular in helping people understand how to prevent disease, to get into what we call this medicine 3.0, where we're preventing disease rather than trying to treat it, more and more dogs are going to become healthier. The podcast I have with Dr. Goldstein, he takes the end result of all the mistakes people have made, and he's saying, hey, let's prevent this. He and I agree. If we prevented disease, there would be a lot less sick dogs. And if that were the case, there'd be a lot less need for veterinarians. So there's a mismatch of increasing the number of veterinarians and people having pets and wanting to prevent disease and going to alternative therapies to get away from traditional veterinarians who are madly trying to fix disease. It's just, it's going around in circles. And I'm having trouble trying to figure why veterinary colleges are doing this. It just makes no sense to me. So anyway, that was my rant on that. More importantly is the fact that a lot of you are trying to figure out how to prevent disease in horses. And so you turn to magazines like Equus that just came in the mail to me. This is called the Wellness Issue 2023. And it's sent to me because I'm a member of the American Association of Equine Practitioners, the AAEP. And what I found fascinating, and step one, is when you look at the advertisements here, the number of advertisements that support this magazine are huge. You have a full page back cover from Platinum Performance. Inside the back cover is EquiThrive. But more importantly, as I flip through this magazine, I'm going to see, I think, 6 total pictures, 6 total pages, I should say, of Boehringer Ingelheim, 6 full-page advertisements all in here. This one is for a percent and sitting right next to why PPID increases laminitis risk. So it's not only the fact that they are putting these in here, but they are putting them right next to articles. Here's Smart Pack has a full-page advertisement saying that they've increased the amount of colic surgery reimbursement. That's right next to ulcer diagnosis and treatment. And if you go one page over, also an ulcer diagnosis and treatment, is a full page advertisement, again, from Boehringer Ingelheim for their GastroGuard, or in this case, UlcerGuard. Pardon me, UlcerGuard. And then we have, of course, Cowboy Magic has a full page. Waterworks has support your horse's gastric health with butyric acid, prebiotics, probiotics, psyllium, and more. Here's a whole page on Equiox, again, from Boehringer Ingelheim. And right next to that is 6 rules for keeping your horse sound. So, make sure you have something that kills pain. So it goes on and on and on with advertisements, which they're paying thousands and thousands of dollars, which is okay, I guess. But you have to say to yourself, who's talking here? I've been invited to, here's a full one for Boehringer Ingelheim for their Vetera vaccines, okay? Right next to the vaccine article that they have. So I want to go over all these articles briefly to give you my take on them. The first in here is the hows and whys of equine vaccination. All right, so why vaccination timing matters, how a horse's vaccine needs can change, and they keep talking about a lot of concepts that I've talked about since 2007, long before COVID, long before vaccinations became on everyone's radar, coffee table, kitchen table discussions of should you vaccinate or shouldn't you, and the anti-vaxxers and we're over vaccinating. And I have to agree with Dr. Marty Goldstein in that last interview. One of his biggest pushes is to stop over vaccinating. And I get it. If you're following Robert Kennedy Jr., he's an anti-over vaccination, but they both proclaim that they're not anti-vaxxers. I have to tell you that it's getting confusing out there. Who do you believe? You've got prominent veterinarians, prominent medical doctors, prominent politicians, all trying to tell you what to do. And then you have full page advertisements from huge pharmaceuticals that say, yes, you should vaccinate with our stuff because we're the best. And then you have the AAP coming out and saying, look, you've got, core vaccines and you have risk-based vaccines. And the core vaccines, they say, are tetanus, West Nile virus, equine viral encephalitis, and rabies. I've been saying that since 2007. Actually, I've been saying it forever. And this boils down to one concept. And I want you to just grab onto this concept if this helps you. If the disease kills you, vaccinate for it. It's pretty simple. If you get tetanus, if your horse gets tetanus or gets rabies, it's going to die. That's it. I've had one case of horse with tetanus and one case of a horse with rabies, positively diagnosed. I went through the whole post-exposure rabies protocol. I'm vaccinated against rabies because a horse attacked me that was positive for rabies. So I know what I'm talking about. That disease will kill you. There's only been one person, I think, who's survived rabies. Maybe it's a few. But everybody who's ever gotten rabies dies. If you get tetanus, you can work on it. You might be able to come out of it, but you basically die. The West Nile virus and equine viral encephalomyelitis, they can cause death too. You can nurse them through it, but it's pretty bad stuff. You don't want to die from that stuff. And the vaccine actually works pretty well for that. But all the other vaccines that you've got, anthrax, botulism, influenza, equine viral arteritis, Potomac horse fever, rhinopneumonitis or EHV, rotavirus, and strangles. These are all diseases that will make your horse sick, but it won't kill your horse. Well, they can kill your horse. Strangles can kill your horse. Botulism can kill your horse. But you have to look at a couple of things. One, How rare is it in your area? What's the chance of getting exposed if you are in that area? And 3, what's the outcome with proper treatment? And I want to add number 4, how well are you preparing your horse for these diseases? I mean, everything in this article is talking about a lot of common sense things like isolation. We've all been drilled into our heads this concept of social distancing, but you can't always social distance. So what protects you from getting exposed to a pathogen from someplace else? Well, it's your immune system. And what does the best thing, what can you do that will improve your immune system more than anything else? It boils down to 2 things: reduce stress and eat protein. Protein is the immune system. Decrease body fat. Body fat increases cytokines. So decrease your body fat, eat a lot of protein, and be happy. I mean, it's that simple. So when these things come at you, you're able to catch it and move on. And I know that there's some people out there who caught COVID and actually died. I'm sure you know people who lost their lives to COVID. And I know some people who seemed like they were healthy, that they didn't seem to have any problems in their life, and yet they got COVID and became very ill. Yeah, it's possible, but they're also alive to talk about it, and they got some good nursing care. So I'm not saying all diseases are without risks, but you have to weigh that and understand that if you've got a horse that's retired out in a paddock that never goes anywhere, no other animals come near it as far as horses go, then just stick with tetanus and rabies. And if you find that encephalitis is coming into your area, or you know that, for instance, in upstate New York, that's where it always starts. They have 1 case of encephalitis. Go ahead and vaccinate for encephalitis, triple E, West Nile virus. Go ahead and vaccinate for those things. But use your head, separate it out. Try to understand that. What am I trying to say? Use common sense for vaccines. And I've got to admit that this article wasn't bad on talking about that. The only problem was it didn't talk about prevention in ways other than vaccinations, and that's what I'm trying to get across to you. Make sure your horses are healthy, happy, isolate them. If your horses aren't coming and going, or if your horses do come and go, have a quarantine barn. Set up your quarantine so that the horses that go to the horse shows don't mingle with your brood mares or with your retired horses. Have them in a separate barn, a separate pasture, someplace where they can't touch noses. If your horses are exposed to strangles, the best way to spread it on your farm is to have a common water source, or have them stable right next door to another horse. It'll go right through your barn. So common sense, gang. It's called biosecurity. And I've done podcasts on this before, and I've got articles written on that, The Horse's Advocate, if you want to read more. Okay, this next article, 7 myths about equine nutrition. I thought this is great because I must be making a difference in some of these things, but they're still not coming all the way out. A lot of them start to say, maybe your horse only needs forage. I'm just laughing. Myth number 1, horses must be fed at the same time every day. We all know that's not true. I mean, if you live in a place that has a time zone that changes twice a year from daylight savings to regular time, where it's bumped an hour, do you do minute adjustments over 7 days to adjust them to it? No. If it's 7 o'clock one day and the next day it's 8 o'clock, you go out at 8 o'clock. The horse doesn't know the time change, but they get along just fine. But if you're not feeding grain, don't worry about it. If you're feeding only forage, they'll be fine. Don't worry about that. So I agree. They said, don't worry about it and stop feeding grain. And I thought that was good. Myth 2, concentrates are the foundation of a healthy equine diet. Well, they're saying, no, it's not. And I'm saying, you're right. It's not. It shouldn't even be on the plate. It should not even be in your barn grain because they're filled with inflammatory ingredients. But they go ahead and say, well, you need to feed calories. Well, they don't understand what calories are. They don't take the time to explain to you what calories in and calories out mean, where the calories come from, how those calories are used, because a calorie from fat is still a calorie. A calorie from grain is still a calorie, but how it's used, brings up the whole debate on whether calories count or not. If you believe in the second law of thermodynamics, you'll 100% calories in equals calories out. But in that equation where you have that equal sign, you have calories in on one side and calories out on the other side, what you're actually looking at is calories in, and then in parentheses, you have what kind of calories and how they react in the horse's body equals calories out, parentheses, how they react inside the body. So if you're dumping sugar in as your calories, it's going to be handled completely differently than if you dump in cellulose from fiber and how that's going to be used. Or if you dump in excess protein and how that's going to affect the whole body. There are so many factors here that we keep going over in the Horse's Advocate. And hopefully you've heard some of my other podcasts to understand what's in that parentheses. But yes, if you want to decrease body fat, you're going to have to decrease the amount of calories going in. But if you have to get rid of body fat, you have to get rid of insulin. And the best way you get rid of insulin is to decrease sugar. That just goes hand in hand. So that was vague at best, and at worst, confusing. Myth 3, horses eat dirt mainly out of boredom. So they discuss what dirt is. They call it geophagia as opposed to coprophagia, which is ingesting feces, or lignophagia, which is eating wood. Fancy. They've got all these new names for pica, which is the abnormal eating of food, but they do not even attempt to go into why they're doing this. Now, they said, give them hay 24/7 to decrease this. And this is one of those concepts that's been out there that people are believing. And yet I keep saying, where's the evidence? Where's the data that says you need to have hay and food in front of a horse 24/7? There is none. Don't tell me that they need food in front of them. That just doesn't happen. If you look at the number of times a horse chews, and this has been documented by Dr. Catherine Haupt, a professor emeritus at Cornell, who says between 10 and 40,000 chews per day. If you take the maximum amount of chews per day with one assumption that one chew equals 1 second, there are 86,400 seconds in a day, which at 40,000 chews means they're chewing 1/2 a day. What are they doing the other half of the day? If you have hay in front of them 24/7, you know, what's going on? And if you also look at hormesis is that time period where the factory gets to shut down and clean up. If you have a factory running 24/7 without the daily maintenance that it needs, the lubrication, the dusting, the cleaning up, that assembly line is going to fall apart. It needs to stop, clean, maintain. And that's what hormesis does. This is why you and I sleep 8 hours a day. It goes in and cleans up our brain of debris. It cleans up our bodies. It gives us a chance to stop eating for 8 hours. Horses do the same thing. They sleep a lot, 8 hours out of the day. We're still looking for another 4 hours to get rid of. They don't need to eat 24/7. But as far as this pica goes, eating things, have you ever thought that maybe they're just saying, I'm missing something in my diet? And what I've found is that if you add the appropriate amount of protein to these horses, so they're getting high quality protein in significant amounts, a lot of this pica will be reduced, if not eliminated. It's not going to get rid of cribbing, I'm sorry to say, but a lot of horses aren't going to be scrambling for dirt or overeating salt or just having food aggression, where they're banging at the door when you walk into the barn. All this goes away because it becomes satiated for two reasons. One, the protein leverage hypothesis tells them that decreased or increased protein will decrease your hunger or satiate the horse. Second, these horses, when you remove the inflammation of grain, can become more stable in the brain. The blood-brain barrier starts to heal, the blood flow to the brain and the flow of fuel to the brain cells, which uses so much energy to keep going, will become less irritated. They'll become more focused, more willing partner. The whole behavioral thing that you have with horses can turn around within days of getting the brain right. I've talked about this a lot before, but if you haven't heard it before, if this is the first time, just go on the no grain challenge. And within 7 days, this horse that is hard to work with, it doesn't like to be groomed or clipped or put on a trailer or anything, suddenly says, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. I'm cool. You know, their brain, just becomes calmed down. It's not on fire anymore. So yeah, decrease inflammatory ingredients and add some protein and see what happens to your horse. I talk about this a lot. Myth 4, brain mashes have a laxative effect and keep a horse warm. If you want to keep your horse warm, heat the water. I mean, get it, put a gas propane heater in your stock tank and have them drink hot water, and they'll love it. They'll drink that thing dry to the point where you have to go out there and fill a 50-gallon stock tank twice a day for a herd of 4 or 5 horses. They're just sucking it dry. You want to add hot water? Nothing wrong with that. But to add bran, that's just adding inflammatory ingredients. Yes, I understand that's supposed to keep water in the guts if things keep moving. But if you want things to keep moving in the gut, get rid of the inflammatory ingredients, get the microbiome correct. We've discussed this before. It's going to move things out, including sand and sand colic. Get the gut microbiome right, and everything will be a lot better. Myth 5, alfalfa is too rich to be safely fed to horses. It says it right in here, and I've said it before. Depends on what part of the country you're from, because there's parts of the country that feed nothing but alfalfa, and then there's other parts of the country says, oh, I've got to stay away from alfalfa. It's too hot a food. And it's just funny because every place is different. I have nothing wrong with alfalfa. Does it have higher protein? That's what the magazine says. It has higher protein, but it doesn't actually say how much more protein it has. It doesn't go into the quality of protein. The fact that the protein of alfalfa and all forage that we feed as hay is really what I call good quality. It does not have all the essential amino acids. So don't fool yourself into thinking your horse is getting all the protein it needs if you're feeding just alfalfa 24/7 and 100%. It just isn't going to get there. And even if you do feed alfalfa, and let's say you feed this incredibly rich, good alfalfa at 16% protein, the bioavailability of that is only 8%. So do the math. You have to knock it by 50%, all grass hays, no matter what the protein content is, crude. You have to divide by 2 to get the actual protein content that's going into the horse. So do your math. I do it for you at the Horses Advocate, so you can read about that. All right, I love this one. It says 4 ways to keep your horse from getting fat. And I think that's fascinating because it doesn't talk about where fat comes from. It says count calories in concentrates. Yeah, how about just eliminate concentrates? I think that would be the best thing, but I'm not an advertiser in a magazine, so I don't, I can say this. Second, rely more on hay. That's what I've been saying, but you have to understand hay is last summer's grass, and in last summer's grass, there can be a lot of sugar. So you may have to take your hay and soak it and get that sugar out. That will help decrease the sugar load on your horse, decrease the insulin that's needed, and help move things around and make things more natural in a horse. So that's interesting. Control grazing. So I get it. Don't turn the horse out on pasture. Yeah, that works. But putting muzzles on, frankly, I think is cruel. I think a horse, it's like, I'm sorry, I put in my terms. If I'm seeing my food in front of me and I have to, eat in these minuscule little bites and I have to work hard to get them, I'm just getting frustrated. I get hangry if you want. So how about this? If you believe in the protein leverage hypothesis and you give your horse, a high quality protein, so his total protein is somewhere between 1/2 and 1 full gram per pound of body weight. So if your horse weighs 1,000 pounds, he's getting between 500 and 1,000 grams of protein per day. He's well within the safety range. It's not going to cause any problems. And he looks at his meal and he says, I'm not that hungry. I'll eat a little bit here. I'll come back and eat some more. It's amazing to see these ponies laying in the hay, or the minis losing their muscles because they don't have to worry about it. They start to limit their intake because they're not searching for something that's missing in their diet. And that's the paradigm that this magazine and all magazines keeps forgetting to tell you. And of course, number 4, increase exercise, which is absolutely impossible for most horses. And I'll tell you why. They're either lame, or you don't have the pasture, you don't have a place to go, they're retired. The list is long. You that are working your horses every day, meaning doing 10 or more miles of trail riding, getting their heart rate up, fine. But if you're in a dressage ring and you're working your horse, and yes, you got his exercise, his heart rate up, and he's lathered up and he's sweating like crazy, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. Just leave the sugar cubes out. Stop feeding carrots and stop feeding grain to these horses. Soak their hay and get their weight down to where they need to be. And the last thing is, on keeping horses from getting fat, is you have to change your paradigm of what a fat horse is versus what an athlete is. Now, we all want our horses to have a nice layer of fat on them because it's actually healthy. So the horse can ebb and flow into and out of excess stored fat. That's ideal. But as soon as the horse starts losing their body fat, most horse owners freak out. They say, oh my God, my horse is losing weight. To which I jokingly say, well, I can make you lose 10 pounds right now. Let me cut your arm off. And they look at me and they immediately know that I'm talking about bones, water, muscle, fat. And they're just talking about body fat. So if you want to talk about a horse losing weight, say my horse is losing body fat. And what happens is when the body fat goes, people now realize that this horse has been losing muscle tone. I want you to step back 1,000 miles away from this argument and just look at it from a distance. If you take an animal or a human and you starve them, there's no food at all, the horse or the human is going to go to the body fat first, and they're going to take care of the body fat. We all know this. But then if we continue to starve the animal, the next thing they do is they start to attack the protein sources. And they start using protein as a fuel by converting it over into glucose. And then because you have to keep the brain alive, and the brain needs glucose. And then at some point, the animal loses all of its muscle. And if you look at the Horse's Advocate under the body condition score of 1, you're going to see animals that have lost all their fat and all their muscle, and the next step is they're going to lose their mind and die. It's that simple. So you want a nice covering of body fat, but remember, every pound of body fat is something your horse has to carry in the athletic event you're asking him to do. So if you have an extra, let's say 80 pounds of body fat on the horse, think about that as an anvil, a farrier's anvil that you're carrying around, and you're jumping off the ground over a fence that's, a meter high or 3 feet, whatever you want to call it, and you're landing on the other side with this extra 80 pounds. Think of all the damage you're doing to that support structure, trying to compress and suppress that shock of the extra 80 pounds. So, that's pure physics. If you remove 80 pounds of fat, it's going to be that much more beneficial for your horse in maintaining its longevity and its purpose of why he's there with you. So don't add excess body fat to any athlete, and you don't want to add excess body fat to any horse, even in retirement, because that leads to increased cytokines, which are the inflammatory molecules that are inside the fat cells that are being stretched silly because you're putting so much fat in them. And you're creating a cytokine storm, and then you bring in a virus or bacteria or some other stress, and the horse becomes ill, and he's already stressed from the excess body fat. This is why so many people who died of COVID had excess body fat on them. That's the number one reason. It's a cytokine storm brought about by excess body, by fat molecules inside the fat cells. I'm going really fast because a lot of this should be a review for most of you listening to it. If it's not a review, if this is all new information for you, understand that we cover this at the Horses Advocate. If you become a member of the Horses Advocate, you can come to the every other Thursday night free live sessions where I answer people's questions, and you can ask questions directly to that. And also some of these podcasts in the past, I go into exactly what's happening. Myth 6, horses are too skinny or fat solely because of how they are fed. Well, I guess what they're saying is you have some hard keepers and easy keepers. Easy keepers are horses that just seem to live on air and they remain fat all the time. Just look for the sugar source. The sugar is in the pasture and in the hay that you're feeding the horse. And if you want your horse to lose body fat, you need to decrease the amount of glucose or fructose that's entering the horse. That's called sugar. And soaking the hay is your best bet. Secondly, add protein, because the protein will decrease the consumption of food because they become satiated because they're not looking for something else in their diet. The ones that are hard keepers, it's interesting because I've seen some hard keepers that are being fed a lot of grain and they just can't gain weight. And you take the horse off the grain, and once the inflammation stops at the gut barrier, the horse starts to gain weight. So it's an inverse relationship. So if you have a horse that's a hard keeper and you're feeding a lot of grain to, try stop feeding grain and just feed pasture and ground plants in the form of hay and see what happens. And be sure to add the protein. Keep in mind that if your horse has lost muscle, and you can see that because they've lost their top line or they've lost the muscle between their ribs, what you would call their ribs are showing. It's not that the ribs are showing. What's actually showing is the lost muscle between the ribs. I know this is a fine point, but I want you to understand that anybody listening to this who loves ribs at the old rib shack around the corner, they're eating the meat off the bones, and that's the meat that's missing. Remember, as a horse breathes, he's exercising those muscles every breath he takes. And if he's exercising them and he's not being able to replace them with the materials necessary to build those muscles, they will slowly become depleted, just like the top line gets depleted because the horse is walking. And the muscles that you don't see are the muscles within the body that are moving while the horse is walking. And then, of course, the tendons and ligaments go bad and they start to break down. So you have suspensory ligament damage due to not enough protein in the diet to maintain their strength. But I sound like a stuck record. Sorry. Myth 7, corn is a heating feed. You've heard this from me ad nauseum. Feed by weight, not by volume. 1 pound of corn and 1 pound of oats has the same amount of calories available. If you don't believe me, go to your local grocery store and look at the package of corn flakes, of Cheerios, which is oats, and of Rice Krispies, which is rice. And you're going to see the same amount of calories per ounce serving. It's the same number of calories. But if I gave you a cup of feathers and a cup of concrete, which one weighs more? The cup of concrete. That's called density. And corn is the densest food. So if you're feeding by scoop and you're feeding, a scoop of corn, it's going to be heavier. It's going to have more calories than a scoop of oats. So it's just that simple. And yet everybody says, well, I feed a scoop. And that's, you want to see me go nuts, just tell me how many scoops you feed your horse. And I'm going to say, is that a scoop that you find in that can of coffee that you bought? It has a small scoop in it. Or is this a scoop that's found on the back of a backhoe made by John Deere? And we all laugh because we don't know what a scoop is. And then somebody says, well, it's a cup. Well, a cup is telling me that you don't understand the concept of density. And that's all they were saying with the myth. Okay, let's move on to the next one. The right approach to parasite control. I think that's a really good thing that we want to talk about. And in a nutshell, they go over all the different classes of compounds. They talk about how horses are becoming resistant to some of these compounds. They're talking about doing a fecal count, finding out which horse is actually the shedder and which isn't. And what bothers me is when you find a horse that's actually shedding a lot of parasites, why is it doing that? What's wrong with its immune system? Why isn't the immune system conquering this infestation of parasites in them? And again, it goes back to how's the immune system? Is a horse's immune system not doing well? If it's not doing well, it's not going to kill the parasites. So they're going to go ahead and start producing eggs. Now, everybody's now agreeing that we don't want to sterilize the horse, that the horse needs to have some sort of parasites going through them. It's actually a very natural thing to do. But they don't go that one step further by saying, if their immune system is right, then they should be able to take care of the excess parasites. That's the key secret. And here we go again. Go back to stop the inflammation from the food that you're feeding, start adding the excess protein of high quality protein in the form of soybean meal. And if you don't know about soybean meal in horses, I've talked about it ad nauseum, but it is the number one safest, most efficient, most effective source of high quality amino acids that you can give a horse. Been using it since 1973. That's 50 years. I don't see a problem with it. And yet I still get people saying, oh, I'm so worried about soybean meal. It's genetically modified. I hate to tell you, but the hay you're feeding and the oats you're feeding and all the other things that you're feeding your horse are all genetically modified, including the soybean meal that's in your mixed grains, the one that has a fancy packaging with a fancy picture that's geared for your age group horse, whether it's a senior or an active or an exercise horse. If they have soybean meal in there, why aren't you concerned about that genetic modification? And then other people are saying, yeah, but what about Roundup or glyphosate? Roundup is Monsanto. Pardon me, it's not Monsanto, it's Merck now. It's their trade name for glyphosate, which other companies make. Glyphosate is out there. It's been out there for years. Whether it's good for you or not is arguable till the sun goes down and comes back up again. I think everybody understands that the chemicals that are out there that are being used in farming are affecting our gut microbiome, are killing them, and are doing other damage, maybe altering our DNA. But I got news for you. The horse is long out of the barn, and you're trying to close the door. It's not going to happen. They have found glyphosate in organic materials, including organic wine. That's the most common one. And in my conversation with Dr. Marty, I was asking him for help on this because we all know that glyphosate's bad. And I'm so grateful for his advice. He says, Geoff, there are toxins, there are too numerous to count that are affecting you and your horse all the time. And you can't fight them all. So how about looking at the problem a little bit differently? How about you looking at the animal's ability to fight off all these attacks from molds, from pesticides, from herbicides, from environmental spewing out of smokestacks and gas pipes, or whatever environmental toxin you're afraid of? Why don't you, instead of looking at the attacking army, look at your own defense system? Let's get your own house in order. How can you be afraid of those things and still be feeding grain? How can you be afraid of all these things and not be feeding enough protein? And that's what I've been trying to say. And this paradigm shift has helped me so much. If you're worried about glyphosate, then get your house of your horse in order. Get them prepared in their immune system and their ability to heal, to give them a hormesis, that 8, 10, 12 hours of not eating so they can prepare their bodies to fight off all these things that are coming at them and make them healthy. I guarantee you that if you can do that, your horse is going to have a health span that on the day he dies, he's going to be happy. Same with you. Get your own house in order and stop worrying about all these things that are outside. You can't get rid of it. The world is too big. Whether it's global warming or glyphosate or what have you, It's like looking at the sky like Chicken Little and say, the sky is falling, and running around like a crazy one. No, stop, take a deep breath, and start preparing your house and make sure that you're ready. I mean, I'm not saying don't be aware of it, but making sure your own house is in order and get your horse set against the threat of parasites. And they don't really talk about that. There's one sentence, just one sentence in here, which says, requires adopting a three-pronged approach to deworming, targeting the horse most affected by parasites, timing treatments appropriately, and taking measures to limit the exposure of all horses to internal parasites. That last part of that one sentence, cleaning up the environment, I've been preaching for years. If you want adequate parasite control and you don't want to put chemicals in your horse's body, get yourself a pitchfork, go out there and start picking up the manure off the paddock and clean your stalls. Don't let them eat where they defecate. That is the number one way to prevent parasites. That's why you and I don't take parasites measurements. You can go to Walgreens or any of your pharmacies and you can buy dewormers right off the shelf. The medication for pinworm I've showed you in my content on the Horse's Advocate. I saw that right there on the shelf at Walgreens. It's called parental tartrate, I think it was. I can't remember, but that's Strongyte. Same product you can get for yourself. And by the way, just as an aside, I've always been against fenbendazole, which is Panacur. And now I found a study that shows that fenbendazole is effective against killing cancer cells and is being used to kill cancer, including glioblastoma that my nephew died of. I think that's just amazing. And I've got one client who's using it, and she's changing her breast cancer around just using fenbendazole and some other products that she's found. And her doctors are saying, we're getting lab errors. This can't be happening. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, here's the next one. The do's and don'ts of managing for healthy joints. Okay, do's and don'ts for managing for healthy joints. And do avoid long layoffs if possible. All right, what you don't use, you lose. I get it. Do keep your horse at a healthy weight. We already discussed that. Keep the weight down. Force equals mass times acceleration. Mass, if it decreases, acceleration is not going to change. The acceleration of gravity is still going to pull your horse from the high of the jump down to the ground. So the acceleration is the same, but the force will change with the mass. So that makes sense. Don't overdo training. Well, I've been saying this for years. LSD is the best thing for your horse. Long, slow distance. No, not a psychedelic drug. Long, slow distance will help build the piezoelectric currents, which I talk about the Horse's Advocate, are the currents that set up when a bone and tissue is bent, stretched, twisted, or otherwise a load is being applied to it. That electric current will attract healing elements. We've known this for years, and it will help deposit in an appropriate way to make things stronger. 6 rules for keeping your horse sound. 1, start your horse on a sensible conditioning program. Yeah, that makes sense. But I still know people who keep their horse in a stall for 5 days, and on Saturday they come out and they do 10 miles on it, and there's no doubt it's going to fall apart. 2, never skip warm-ups or cool-downs. I think everybody can agree with that. Stretching before and after is important. There's plenty of science behind that in humans. 3, keep his hooves properly trimmed. This just blows my freaking mind. Properly, the word properly is in the believer of whoever's saying it. So proper for one farrier or for one horseman might be different than another's. But I say this all the time. And if you haven't heard me ask this, I've asked this question of every veterinarian and every farrier that I've seen for the past year. It's coming up on a year. I say, what causes that stink when you take that hot shoe and put it on the bottom of a horse's hoof and all that smoke comes off and billows out and stinks? What makes that? And not one person has been able to tell me. They get down to the point, well, you're burning tissue or you're burning keratin. They know the word keratin, but they don't know what keratin is. And keratin is a molecule of protein. It is 100% protein. It's what makes up your hair. So if you use a hair dryer and you use it too long and it starts to stink, the same thing's happening. What's happening is 24% of that hoof, or 1/4 of the hoof, is one amino acid. And that amino acid is one of the few amino acids that has sulfur in it. And sulfur is the element that stinks. And when you burn that hoof, you're releasing that sulfur smell. Sulfur is unique because they create a double bond. A single bond is like you and me holding each other by our hands, by one hand, and us dancing around crazy like, in some sort of rock and roll, whatever. And we don't have the strength to hold on, and our hands slip apart, and one of us goes flying across the dance floor. So we come back because we want to keep dancing, and we grab each other with two hands. It's called a double bond. It makes us stronger. That's what sulfur does. It takes a long, really flexible molecule called a protein called keratin, and it binds it into a folded, rigid structure. And the more sulfur bonds you have, the stronger the hoof becomes. So I've been begging people to say, before you start applying your rasp to the hoof, feed the horse so the horse has a healthy hoof to rasp. And it's a concept that has escaped the American Association of Equine Practitioners and every horse trainer and every horseman out there that I've ever met. They don't understand. They're trying to fix a hoof without fixing it from the inside. They keep applying different plates or different trimming, or they start applying things to the outside of the hoof, conditioners or stimulants. They put boots on them. They do everything they can, but nobody seems to be saying, wow, you mean I can feed the horse and change the hoof? Absolutely. If you start feeding to feed the horse's hoof by feeding an abundant amount of high quality protein in a diet that is void of all inflammatory ingredients, you'll have a hoof in about 2 to 4 months that your farrier will say, wow, I don't know what you're doing, but don't change a thing. The hoof has never looked better. And it may take a year to get a full solid hoof. It may take up to 2 years for your horse to stop having sole abscesses. It takes a long time. This is why when you do this diet change, you have to start a journal. But that's just foundation right there. So yeah, you can keep his horse's hooves properly trimmed, but what does proper mean? And for each horse, it's completely different. If your farrier is one of those rare farriers that have this gift of seeing the physics that are behind the hoof and they trim it appropriately, power to them. They can get rid of quarter cracks and put some shoes with clips on to distribute the stresses in different ways. All of it's fine and dandy. But if you're farriers and say, hey, look, this is a long-term project and we're going to start by feeding the hoof so it's solid, and then we're going to work on it every day over the next year, and don't get rid of me. This is a long-term project. I want you to see right in writing. I want to contract with you that if you want me to work on this hoof, then we are going to contract for 1 year, and this is how we're going to feed the horse. I long for that day. If you're a farrier listening to this, I challenge you. Go ahead and get that sheet of paper and say, I, so-and-so, and I'm in agreement with you, so-and-so, that we're going to work on this starting this date, fill it in, and say we're not expecting results for the next 3 to 6 months, or we're going to expect minimal results, but as the hoof grows down, it's going to take a year to get a full hoof wall. And once we do, we're going to be able to have solid hoof walls. It's just amazing once you start doing this, and you'll become the best farrier out there, because every artist knows that if you aren't given the materials to work with, it doesn't matter if you're a sculptor or a painter or whatever, it's going to look like crap. So there's probably nothing wrong with you as a farrier. It's just the materials you're given is crap. And so you fail as many times as you succeed. And sometimes you think it's all luck. But I'm just telling you, if you can feed the hoof, you'd be a lot better off. Rule 5, introduce some cross-training, fine. 6, stick to good footing. The footing goes back to get your horse solid and sound. It's like the glyphosate thing, get your own horse's house in order. Give it the tendons, the ligaments, the connective tissue that it needs to become strong. So when it does hit some bad footing and slips, or it has increased concussion, or it's too deep and it strains your tendons, if your tendons are made out of the right material and you've been training correctly with LSD, long, slow distance, there's a good chance it'll be able to survive whatever you feed it or expose it to. Do you consider a joint supplement? And I thought that was interesting. Joint supplements, as far as I'm concerned, are nothing more than high quality proteins or amino acids, or in case of polysaccharides or long chain molecules of glucose, sometimes they can skirt through. But a lot of times what they're doing is they're binding to lectins, they're binding to inflammatory ingredients, and they're hauling ingredients out. Keep in mind that in humans, they have found that the broken down dead bacteria in the body, they make little pieces called LPSs. Just don't worry about what it means, LPSs. Just think of them as little pieces of poop. And they bind to seed oils. And in every food that you feed your horse, if you look at the ingredients list, you're going to find a seed oil. It could be soybean oil, it could be corn oil, vegetable oil, sunflower, canola, or any seed, flaxseed, chia seed oil. Any of these oils are seed oils. And in humans, those seed oils bind to these broken down pieces of bacteria, and they have the ability to penetrate the gut barrier, and they have found them inside the joints of horses. I'm sorry, inside the joint of humans. And what I find interesting is when people take their horses, especially their older horses that are kind of moseying around real slow out there, they look stiff and in pain. When they take them off all food that has seed oils in there, and trust the idea that they're going to get all the oils they need from cellulose, and then they add some soybean meal as a protein source, they don't usually gain a lot of muscle because they're already 30 plus years old, and that's really hard to add muscle. But they tell me in the year or two of life that they have on this non-inflammatory diet, they say, no, he never really gained weight, but oh my gosh, you should have seen him running around the paddock like a 2-year-old. He was pain-free, his joints are free. Further, when my clients hear this and they take seed oils out of their diet and only use fruit oils, which are olive oil, coconut oil, and avocado oil, those are fruits, their joint pain goes away. They don't feel stiff in the morning. They get up, not all of them, but a lot of them get up in the morning. I personally get up and I get moving. There's no stiffness in any of my joints for all the work that I've done all my 70 years. There doesn't seem to be any stiff, but I don't use any seed oils in my life. We have gone almost an hour and I'm not even halfway through. So maybe I'll split this into two, or maybe I'll just keep going. So let's just keep going. Manage your horse for digestive health. I mean, diet and lifestyle can affect a horse's risk for ulcers, colic, and other digestion-related problems. How gut-friendly is your horse's current management routine? Answer the following 5 questions. 1, does your horse get regular turnout? I think turnout is essential for a horse, but I also know that a lot of people don't have turnout for their horses, or if they do, there's no pasture, but it's just an exercise lot. I get it. It's an awful situation for horses that are migratory animals that are supposed to run forever. But we have dogs and cats that are kept in the house that shouldn't be in there. They should be running around forever. So it is a part of living in a human world. And as you remember, helping horses thrive in a human world is my tagline. And we have to help these horses live in a human world. So if they don't get enough turnout, I get it. Exercise helps everybody, everything. If you can, try to get your horse turned out, even if it's for a month or two during a season. Like you take your horse away from the showgrounds and you put it out on a field where it can run around and be a real horse. It's just like you taking a vacation. Everybody needs that. I think psychologically it really helps. Does your horse ever go hungry during the day? Well, here they're saying the horse should be fed and have something in front of it 24/7 using a hay bag, a hay net to slow down the intake of food. Once again, Start feeding protein in appropriate amounts, and you're going to find that the hay intake decreases. Then the horse can have that period of time where his factory can be cleaned, the hormesis, so the cells can clear itself up. That is critical in all mammals' lives, is to have that downtime. So no, I do not agree of feeding a horse 24/7. And I want somebody to show me the science. And believe me, I'm going to tell you that it's not good science if you show it to me, but go ahead and show it to me anyway, where somebody did the due diligence and had a randomized controlled study of a placebo-controlled group. It's kind of hard to have a placebo-controlled group where a horse is limited to 12 hours of eating and 12 hours off, like we do with our own horses here on our own farm, that are fat and happy and shiny and everything's fine. They're not food aggressive and everything's fine. Or the horse that has hay in front of them 24/7. Take whatever blood values you want or whatever behavior issues you want, compare the two. And I'm going to tell you that the horse that has some downtime is probably going to be healthier. 3, are you feeding dietary concentrates in a thoughtful way? I don't even want to go into that. They're saying break it up into small quantities. What else does it say? Excess amount of grain can be bad for you, and dumping it in all at once. Yeah, just stop feeding grains, please. And if you have to, if for whatever reason you want to keep feeding grains, fine. Get cleaned oats and feed that. We've been feeding that for decades, for a century. That's fine. Do that. At least you've taken the outer skin off that has the lectins in it, and you're feeding just oats in the form of starch and whatever else might be in there. If you feel like it's absolutely necessary. But when you start feeding these feeds that have inflammatory ingredients in there, forget about it. And you don't want to feed a lot because, as it said in here someplace, if you feed too much bran or grains that don't have dicalcium phosphate, monocalcium phosphate, you can get rickets. I mean, it's pretty rare. If you just don't feed a lot of grains, you're going to be fine. Ulcer diagnosis and treatment, and they go on saying GastroGuard and UlcerGuard are the gold standard. Well, I already showed you the full page ad that they had in there for that. Then they said, let's see, sucralfate and ranitidine. These are antacids, etc. They say supplements and herbal products formulated to prevent ulcers are also available, but are not required by law to be tested as extensively as medications. So they're basically saying, go ahead and use the holistic or natural whatever medications. But, you know, we can't guarantee it. UlcerGuard has the testing behind it to be effective. And there's no doubt UlcerGuard is great. It's called Prilosec for humans. You know, you saw all the pictures or commercials for that. But if you do it long enough, you'll definitely be able to change the bacterial growth of the stomach, of the whole digestive tract, and you can lead yourself to a lot of problems that way. So it should be used once for treatment. But if you're not getting rid of the root cause, it goes back to the beginning of this podcast where I talked about medicine 3.0. You have to get to the root cause. Stop treating, stop throwing things at diseases. Let's get the horse's house in order. Let's get it preventive. And the number one cause of ulcers in horses is not that they're not eating food. It is because, one, the bacteria have been allowed to change their population, and it produces various things that cause the horse to create ulcers or burn spots inside the digestive tract. So that's number one. Inflammatory ingredients are doing that. Excess sugar is doing that. Number two, you have a horse that you believe in me and you fast and you say, okay, we're not going to feed it for 12 hours, but right in the middle of it or at the very end of it, you put a saddle on the horse and you go ahead and ride it. Well, now you have an empty stomach and a horse that is continually secreting hydrochloric acid, And if you just let the horse eat a little bit of hay, like a flake of hay, and fill that stomach up and then exercise it, you're not going to have a problem. Okay. Oh, there's so much more. Here's one. It says, well, I'm not going to go into that. Probiotics and prebiotics. I've gone over this. Probiotics, you're dumping bacteria in the horse's gut. There's nothing to say that those probiotics actually make it to where they need to go. If the probiotic is not encapsulated to protect it against the acid bath of the stomach, then they're going to be eaten by the acid bath of the stomach. That's the purpose. By the way, if you're giving your horse an antacid of any kind, you're decreasing the horse's defense system against bacteria that come in the dirt of the hay and the pasture that it's on. So you're taking away a defense mechanism by treating them with antacids. So that's something you want to think about. Then you have prebiotics, and prebiotics, even though it's called pre, it works later on down the digestive tract by feeding the gut bacteria back there and making sure that they're healthy and happy. So by changing the gut bacteria, you're going to change the requirements for what they need to eat. So, and it's interesting. I just talked to a gal who's running a farm, and she didn't know that the bacteria were in the gut. She had no idea. That she just thought all food was digested in a sterile environment. And that's, we have to change that. We have to understand that we're living together with trillions of microbes, you and your horse, to break down this bacteria, or break down the food. And the bacteria are constantly changing according to how you feed them. So if a horse, bacteria A needs fuel or food A to survive, and bacteria B needs food B to survive, and you feed a mix of A and B food, they'll both survive. But if you feed a food that's more of A and less of B, the bacteria B is going to die and fade away. And that may be good because bacteria B could be a bad bacteria, or bacteria A is a bacteria and you're feeding it and you create more ulcers and more upset in the horse. And even though that's just an A-B, it gives you the idea that when you have trillions of bacteria, where you have hundreds and hundreds of different families and species of bacteria, they all need different foods. And some people believe that prebiotics work. I personally think they do if they're encapsulated and they've been tested deep inside your gut. And the probiotic or prebiotic that I take and probiotics have been tested in a system that shows that they don't get released from this capsule until they pass through the small intestine and get into the hindgut, and they're actually in the position where they're going to be used. And it's really helping me a lot, especially after going through radiation therapy that pretty much destroyed my descending colon, and I don't wish that on anybody. So it's working. It's going to take maybe a year or more until I get everything back in order. But once it gets in order and if you got everything going, the food should be able to take care of everything. So use prebiotics and probiotics if necessary. And there's some good companies out there that will help you with this, but and for horses. But you have to really, really work hard to find those companies and make sure that they're doing okay. I recommended one company, a full bucket, I think it's called, put together by two veterinarians. They seem to know what they're talking about. I talked to the PhD who's in charge of research at an AAP conference before COVID, and she assured me that their product is tested and it does make it through the acid bath of the stomach. I recommended it to some people in South Africa. They couldn't get it exported or imported into their country. So they went with baker's yeast, and that seemed to do just as good a job in their particular situation. So anyway, that's something that I've talked about in the past. Okay, number 5, how do you feed your hay? And they said, do you put it on the sandy soil where they can get sand impact? I have a whole podcast on sand colic that sand is everywhere. I mean, yeah, I live in Florida. If you live in Long Island, if you live anywhere near the coast, there's sand. We had sand in upstate New York. We have sand everywhere because, as we know, over the millions of years, the water line has changed all over the country, all over the world, and so everybody's got access to sand. What helps get the sand out? a good normal gut bacteria, period. So, and they said feed psyllium. That's pretty much proven. Some people believe, yes, feed psyllium, but again, you're trying to get the sand out, where the best treatment for sand colic is to make sure the gut bacteria is correct. Refer you to my sand colic podcast. Here's a special section called first response. Okay, so in other words, in every one of these sections, they take a disease or syndrome, like the first one is laminitis, and they tell you what to do first. And the first thing they say in almost every section is call your veterinarian. So I'm going to agree with that. I think your veterinarian has a vested interest in helping you to resolve whatever's going on. Nobody makes money and everybody has heartache, including the veterinarian, if the horse doesn't make it, if they succumb to whatever disease. So the vet is going to do whatever they can to make sure your horse gets through it. They're going to patch it up and get it going. I do believe that it's your responsibility as a horse owner to prevent these things from happening in the first place. I think laminitis is a preventable disease. However, if you continue to feed grain to a horse and you don't give it enough protein, high quality protein, such as soybean meal, that you are begging to have your horse become laminitic. It's just that simple. And so start, like it says, first, call your veterinarian. I'd say before first is prepare your horse so it doesn't ever have this happen. The best colic is one that doesn't happen. The best laminitis is the one that doesn't happen. The best lameness, I mean, I could go on and on. It's the one that doesn't happen. So make sure you're doing things right. They said the first thing you should do, other than call your veterinarian, is put your horse in a bucket of ice. I have to agree 100%. This has been proven over and over again to stop the inflammation. But I want you to understand, I put forward a little bit of a hypothesis, unproven, but still a hypothesis, that the fine micro vessels of the hoof are similar to the micro vessels of the kidneys. And we know that fructose, which is a sugar that's sweet, is inflammatory to the kidneys and causes the angiotensin system to screw up, which leads to high blood pressure in humans. That's pretty well documented now. And if you have high blood pressure, you should be avoiding fructose as best you can. No high fructose corn syrup, no table sugar, which is 50% fructose, no fruits, especially no fruit juices, no fructose at all. Get rid of fructose. No dried fruit, no cranberries or raisins, dried cranberries. Get away from it all. And that should help lower your blood pressure. My hypothesis is the fructose in the spring green grass is what's causing the inflammation of the capillaries in the hoof, and that's causing the laminitis down there. So avoid fructose at all costs. But anyway, then they said why PPID increases laminitis risk. And of course, there's the Percend advertisement right there. Percend is the pergolide, which is the treatment. I have multiple podcasts on what Cushing's is, or PPID, and why I think it is a neurodegenerative disease brought on by basically brain inflammation from inflammatory ingredients, decreased blood flow to the brain, i.e. metabolic syndrome of the brain, and also a lack of high quality protein that's occurring, that all neurotransmitters are proteins. And dopamine is a protein, which is a neurotransmitter, and Percend helps to complete the process between the hypothalamus that's sending a message to the pituitary to do something. And I actually believe that in the word dysfunction, PPID, it stands for pituitary pars intermedia dysfunction. Dysfunction implies that it's not working properly. The pituitaries are working properly. There's nothing wrong with the pituitary. It's overworked. That's why it's growing. The problem is it's not receiving the signal to stop working. So yes, technically it's dysfunctioning, but it's not because the pituitary is wrong. It's because it's not getting the message to stop working out. And so it gets enlarged. And Percend comes in there and basically tells it to stop. And you can, I think, help horses. And I've had horses with the help of the veterinarians doing blood tests, get their horses off medication, and have their horses' ACTH levels come down to 0 all through diet. So try it, get your vet on board with it. Say, look, I'm tired of feeding Percend or Pergolide or what's the other one? We used to use it before Pergolide, cyproheptadine. So we're getting our horses off that by increasing the amount of protein and decrease the amount of inflammatory ingredients to get the brain right. And it may take months, it may take half a year, may even take a year. But if your vet is willing to come out and keep testing and reducing the dosage and still test, yeah, it might cost you a little bit of money up front, but over time, both you and your veterinarian are going to start to feel confident that this disease is secondary to what you're feeding the horse. And once you get the horse back on track, you might not need to medicate the horse for this disease. Anyway, it's something to think about. Okay, the next one is on colic, and I've gone over colic 100 times. Start feeding your horse correctly with proper forage. Get it out of inflammatory ingredients, and colic should diminish. When I got out of vet school, I was taught that it was migrating larvae of parasites that cause it. And that's why we're also big into deworming. But had I known then what I know now, I probably would have said, yeah, parasites might be a problem, but the immune system isn't working right and there's too much gut inflammation. So that's that. He's flare-up. I have a whole podcast on equine asthma. He's also known as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, is now called equine asthma because they now realize that it is very similar to human asthma. And in human asthma, they're linking it to metabolic syndrome in humans. So there we are again, back to metabolic syndrome of horses. I asked a presenter at an AAP conference if anyone's looking at metabolic syndrome and equine asthma, and she says, yes, people are looking at it. I think there's someone in Mississippi vet school and possibly in Delaware, I'm not sure, who are looking at this, and hopefully we find that asthmatics are brought on by this. I will say that of all the horses that have switched over to no grain diet and added soybean meal, I don't think there's been one horse that has cured their heaves or their equine asthma. I don't think it gets worse, but I don't think we've been able to cure it. And again, if you're curing it by giving any sort of steroid, you're opening your horse up to the possibility of having laminitis. And again, if you decrease inflammation, decrease insulin, and increase the high quality protein, especially methionine with the disulfide bonds that are converted into cysteine that make up 24% of that hoof. If you've done that, you're protecting your horse against the idea that it's going to have laminitis from giving some sort of steroid, dexamethasone specifically. So if your horse needs to be treated with steroids to avoid severe equine asthma, prepare it so it can stand up to that. It says make sure your horse's air is fine, and on. I've always said you have to remove all the causes to find what actually is the cause. And it may be dust, it may be pollen, it could be a lot of things, but I still boil it down to it's probably metabolic disease that may have some permanent things going on. Large lacerations, what to do. I have a whole thing on how to prevent proud flesh, or how to take care of proud flesh if it does occur. But basically, you got to get it clean. The sooner you get it cleaned, the better. The 3-hour rule, if you get a cut and it's filled with dirt, get in there and clean it out. I don't care. I should say, I do care what you use to clean it out, but don't worry about whether you're using soap, betadine, chlorhexidine, diluted, of course, and scrubbing, which is totally wrong for proud flesh, but you have to do it. You have to clean it, and then protect it from dirt. And if you do that, and the horse is healthy and it's got plenty of protein in there, it will go in there and heal this up. I had a huge gaping wound on my hand. It's really hard to see. Yeah, it's hard to see. This line here, it cut through all the skin all through the muscles, is right down to tendons. It was really a chunk of meat showing. And everyone says, oh, you're going to get that sutured up, right, doc? And I'm like, no, I'm going to clean it. And there was blood and it was painful, but I took betadine, scrub, and a sponge or gauze, I can't remember. And I just washed it in the wash rack. I mean, I washed it and washed it and washed it and cleaned it up, put a sterile Telfa pad on it, put pressure on it, and wrapped it up and went right back to work. And yeah, it took a while to heal, but it healed beautifully as far as I'm concerned, with no more scar than if I'd used sutures. Suture only brings the edges together, but if you don't clean the wound, it's going to fall apart. It's going to what they call dehiss, which just means it comes all apart. It's disgusting. You've wasted your time and money suturing it up. You must clean it, whether the vet is coming for it or not. If you live out in the middle of nowhere, clean it, wrap it, keep it clean. If you are going to have a vet come suture it up and it can't get there for a couple of hours, clean it like crazy. If the vet's right around the corner and says, I'll be there in 5 minutes, let that vet clean it up. By the way, I was about to say, let him clean it up. And of course, I shouldn't say that, right? And these pronouns are so important to everybody nowadays. And in this magazine, every time they use a pronoun for veterinarian, they said she or her. And I thought that was just a sign of the times. Back when I graduated in 1984, it was a 50-50 mix in our class, a male-female ratio. And now it's like 95, 98% females, because all the males have figured out that they can make more money someplace else without having to invest so much money to become a veterinarian. And I think once the cost of veterinary education escalates even more and the opportunities to earn money decrease, I think all of us are going to be hurting for veterinarians out there. I hate to sound like a Debbie Downer, but yeah, it's coming. So the more you learn how to prevent disease in your horse and protect its health and get its health right on the inside, as I'm now saying, get your own horse's house in order, the less chance you're going to need to call the vet to fix things. Because at the rate of attrition in an equine world, you may find that there's not enough vets to come to your place unless you live in some place like Wellington, Florida, where there's tripping over each other, because that's where the money's made. But if you live out in a rural area, if you're a cowboy out there, howdy. I love cowboys. I don't know why they're not called cattle boys, because cow is a gender. They used to be called cattlemen. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, you may be on your own sooner than you think. All right. Choke. If your horse is stretching out and he's got feed coming out of its nostrils, it's choke. Please, as they say here, don't squirt a hose down their throat. Please, you're going to kill your horse, because you're going to send it right down into the lungs. And once the food gets in the lungs, your horse is going to get pneumonia and he's going to die. So please, never, ever stick a hose down the throat of a horse. That's something, if your horse chokes, call your veterinarian. And no, choke is not caused by bad teeth. And if your vet says, well, maybe the teeth need floating, probably not. If the horse is eating and swallowing everything just fine up until the choke, look for some damage, some trauma that came to the throat. I just had a horse that I was told is 28, 30 years old, and the horse had colic and it was surgical, and they took it down there and they tubed the horse multiple times. And she said the first time they had trouble getting the tube down there. And once the horse was over the colic and came back home, the horse choked twice. And when I was talking to them, we finally found out that it was probably the tubing that caused it, even though their veterinarian says, oh, it's dentistry. So because she had an opportunity to bring her dentist in to show them that I had not been doing dentistry the correct way on their horse for the years I've been doing, years, literally years, like, I don't know, 15 years. Well, it was my fault because I wasn't floating the teeth right, and now the horse is choking. It had nothing to do with it passing his stomach tube the couple of weeks before. Don't get me started. This one, scratches. Okay, scratches is when the pastern starts to get dermatitis. I think that picture is a really good one if you're watching this. If you're not watching it, don't worry about it. Scratches, and then 2 pages, 3 pages later, you have rain rot. And rain rot is basically scabs that occur on the back of the horse where rain falls on it. Scratches and rain rot, I used to cure by deworming the horse once a week for 3 weeks with ivermectin. And almost every horse got rid of their, it didn't increase. And then as the scabs came off, everything was fine. Now I know that it's more than that. Their immune system shot. Ask yourself this one question. In your herd of horses, of 2, 3, 4 horses or more, why is there only 1 horse with rain rot or 1 horse with scratches? In my personal case, I had 2 horses, a mother and a daughter. Both had rain rot, both had scratches on my own farm. And I said, why do these horses have it? And the other dozen or more had nothing. And I just assumed it was their immune system. And I started to treat their immune system by deworming once a week for 3 weeks with ivermectin. And these horses immediately look better. Their haircut looks better. The scratches and rain rot went away. And that's always been my treatment. But now I realize it's more than that. Stopping the grain, adding soybean meal as a high quality protein source will prevent your horse from having scratches and grease heel and other insect fly bite dermatitis, the ventromyndine dermatitis. It takes up to 2 years, literally 2 years to get the immune system back in order, but it will occur if you're patient enough. And you'll have to do good nursing care up until that point. But every summer that comes, you'll say, wow, that's a whole lot better than last summer. It's kind of cool. The other 2 in here is heat exhaustion. Don't be a dummy. Just don't be a dummy. If your horse feels hot and stops sweating and shutting down, he's going to die, and it's your fault. I don't know how else to explain it. I was working in some stalls yesterday, and I'm down here in South Florida, and the fans didn't work, and I was dying. I had 4 horses to do, and after the third horse, I had to leave, sit in the air-conditioned room, drink some water, because I could feel the heart rate starts to thin out, starts to become elevated. You start to feel lightheaded. I know all the signs that occur well before I'm in any danger, but I know it's coming. It's up to you to figure out, is your horse starting to get too hot? And they can do that pretty easily, especially if they don't sweat. They can overheat quickly. And the best thing is stick a thermometer in them. If the temperature goes up to 101 plus, you got a problem. Get some water on that horse, just head to tail. Just soak them, especially the legs, especially where there's arteries available, right around the neck or right down on the lower limbs. Get them cold and then offer water. Runny nose. They said foul-smelling discharge, bright red blood, dark blood, thick yellow pus-filled mucus, saliva and chewed food. These are all things to call your veterinarian right away. But if your horse has asthma, it could be a thick, white, stick-to-the-wall type stuff. Loose shoe. This is an emergency. Step 1, call your farrier. But they said basically wrap it up. If you don't know how to pull a shoe off, learn how to pull it off. And if you don't, your farrier will holler at you. I had so many farriers holler at me as a veterinarian. Oh, Dr. Tucker pulled this shoe off. So I got pretty good of it really quick. I took it off. So the nails came out clean and they weren't ripped apart. But again, it goes back to feeding the hoof to make it stronger. Maybe this wouldn't happen. And finally, I think the last one they have here is tying up. Yep, tying up. You never want to see your horse tie up. Tying up is cramps, severe cramps of all the muscles. They will drop out from underneath you. They are panting. They have a wild look in their eyes. The sweat will pour off as if you're wringing out a wet washcloth. They are in so much pain and agony, and there's nothing much you can do with them other than to kill pain. and keep them very quiet. If it's cold out, put a blanket on them. If it's warm out, you can even try cooling them off, and try to understand why your horse tied up in the first place. If it's not genetic and the polysaccharide storage myopathy, there's a good chance that you are feeding way too much sugar, especially before an event. And the mitochondria are not used to switching over to body fat for fuel. And if they can't switch back and forth, they're going to have a problem. All right, that's it. That's your Equus magazine all wrapped up. What I'm trying to say to you in these podcasts of reading magazines is that when you read them, you have to read between the lines. You have to keep asking, but why, mommy? Just say, but why is this happening? And if you don't like to answer, ask again, keep asking, and get down to the root cause. Why is this happening in the first place? Why does my horse colic? Why does he have laminitis? Why does he have gastric ulcers? Why does he have skin conditions? And keep asking the questions until you can get your own horse's house in order. And once you get your horse's house in order, you'll be fine. But going back to the very thing that how many vets are going to come to your door, especially if you live 50 miles away from some veterinarian's office, I don't know. I've been preaching this for almost 10 years. Houston, we have a problem. You can listen to my podcast there, or read my blog. It's not a blog, an article I wrote to veterinarians almost 10 years ago, that the attrition rate and the replacement rate of equine veterinarians is decreasing rapidly. And if you continue to feed your horses the way these magazines are telling you, you're going to maintain disease or unhealthy horse. It's going to require your veterinarian to come out to diagnose a lameness or to fix illness that's going on. And you have to strive. And I'm not saying that everything is all nutritional. And I'm not saying that if you switch the nutrition over to the way they evolved to eat, things aren't going to happen. They're still going to break legs, going to run through fences, kicked by other horses. But what I can pretty much help you understand that if you feed them the right way and start to give them a life that's based on the horse and not the human, the horse has a better chance of surviving this human world and becoming having a health span that saves you having trips from a vet that probably isn't going to come out and help you anyway, because you're just too far away or they're spread too thin. Again, 1.4% of all veterinarians who graduate from vet school are going to become horse vets. And if you're bad with math, that means less than 1.5 graduates become a horse vet out of every 100. Or if you want to put it 14 out of 1,000, for every 1,000 who graduate, you're going to have 14 that are going to become a horse vet. So if LSU increases to 840, you might have 10 that come out there as horse vets. You might. And as I asked Denny French in that interview that I talked to, that I had a podcast with him a while back, he told me in my answer to how many good horse vets are coming out, he answered good with a big question mark, because not all veterinarians coming out of vet school are really good horsemen. They're high school, college graduates who had grades who become good veterinarians, and they know how to operate the equipment. And believe me, they're brilliant. They're geniuses. They can do surgery on your horse. They can help cure lameness. They understand how to inject joints and what things to do. There's nothing wrong with these veterinarians. But when it comes down to are they horsemen or not, it's debatable. They had 1 or 2 horses growing up, and you have to find people, and these are usually your older veterinarians who were brought up and raised with hundreds, if not more, horses in their life to become great horsemen, and they became veterinarians. And it's hard to find them. So if 14 out of 1,000 are going to become horse vets, and then the next statistic says that 50% of them will be gone in 5 years, that means 7 out of those 1,000, or maybe 5 out of the 840 that LSU is going to graduate, they're going to become horse vets and still stay in there. And they could become your horse vet, and you might not get along with them, or they could be the best thing ever, the best vet ever to work on your horse. The one that you say, doc, don't die, don't retire, I couldn't live without you, but they retire or they die. And where does that leave you? You know, you were lucky to get one, or you're going to get another one. So again, not to be Debbie Downer, I'm just actually telling you, each and every one of you, if you own a horse or many horses, it is up to you to get the horse's house in order, try to prevent these diseases from occurring, get them as healthy as possible. So when you do need a veterinarian, you're ready to go and you give your horse the best chance of survival. Anyway, that's it, Doc T. After an hour and a half, I'm going to break off and let you guys go about your business. And I'll read you some more of my book next time. Anyway, thanks. Doc T out. Hey, everyone. Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.